So this is the next video in the series of how to play Savage Worlds. Last video we covered some of the basics of the races and why you might want to play one of those races. So for this one we're going to talk about a couple of things, and I promise this one will be under the 13 minutes of the last one. So one of the first things that you do when you're creating a character, you do your race, and then you're moving into the rest of character creation. And if you're following along with the book, I am going through these actually as the steps are laid out in the book of how you should generate your character. And we can talk about the why these are laid out the way they are. So the first thing you do after selecting a race, you're going to look at hindrances. Now, hindrances are flaws for your character. Some of them can be, they're very generic, like vow. But it's up to you to be narratively enabling your character of what that vow means and how strong is that vow. And some of the hindrances are broken down into a minor and a major. A minor is something that's just like, I like a quirk minor. Maybe your character just, cracks your knuckles, right? It's just a thing. That would be a minor quirk. And a major quirk might be, when you're sitting there in the middle of a conversation, you just do it. And it's going to stop most conversations. That would be a major level of a quirk because it's going to draw attention to yourself. And so not every hindrance is laid out into a minor and a major. Some are only minor, some are only major, and there are some that have a choice. Now here's the big thing about hindrances. They are not mandatory. You don't have to choose hindrances at all. You can go about your business. Most people are going to want hindrances for a variety of reasons. One, they add to the role-playing aspects of your character, and when you're playing your character and you're using your hindrances and you're really getting into the character, those hindrances can help you generate bennies at the table for playing the oddities of your character. They will help you earn bennies, and we'll talk about bennies later on. But two, there's a mechanical benefit that when you take hindrances, they grant you points to spend during character creation to make your character better. So you can only have 4 points worth of hindrances. A minor hindrance is worth 1 point. A major hindrance is worth 2 points. You can have 2 major, it would be 4 points. You could have 4 minors, or you could have 2 minors and a major. It's really up to you, and it's against your vision. Some of them may feel like, I'm going to take something I have allergy to a very rare flower. Okay, well, your GM is probably going to overrule that, or at least you're not going to be as clever as you think you are. Good GMs will never let you be as clever as you think you are for trying to, point steal. Now, when you take those hindrances, like I said, you get 1 for a minor, 2 for a major, and those can be used to get an edge. Right, so that's 2 points. They can be used to increase one of your primary attributes, and they can be used to obtain a skill, or they can be used to advance a skill, or then you can also use the points to get extra starting cash. So that's really and there's a handful of hindrances, but it's really where they lie, and that's what their uses are, both role playing and a mechanical aspect to it. So next thing you're going to do is generate your attributes. Now, skills and attributes are coupled together in Savage Worlds under the broad name of traits. For attributes, you're looking at there are 5 attributes that every character has. They are agility, smarts, spirit, strength, and vigor. Unlike most games that most people are used to, there are no dump stats in Savage Worlds. I promise you, it doesn't matter what you do. Agility controls a lot of your combat aspects, as well as like athletics, and there's quite a few skills you're going to use agility for, and we'll talk about tests. Smarts. That's going to be for a lot of your knowledge skills. They're going to be for spellcasters. Spirit is the same way. Spirit is used in only a couple of skills, but it's used a lot in the game. It controls, are you afraid or not? Are you shaken or not? It also helps control spellcasters that may use miracles. It's more traditional for that side of the house. Strength is strength. It adds to your melee weapon damage. It also helps a couple other skills that are very important to the game. And then there'll be strength checks along the way. And then vigor is your overall health of your character. Vigor doesn't control any skills, but vigor keeps you alive in a variety of ways. So they're all important. And when I talk about tests in Savage Worlds, if you face foes that may be too tough for you because you can't get through them for whatever reason, you can make a test. And so, say you're going to do the old I kick dirt in someone's eyes. Well, that may be an athletics test for you, or your opponent kicks dirt in your eyes. That's their athletics against your agility, right? Or your smarts. Really, it's the GM, and it's a way you narrate that. So that's where these abilities can become very important. Now, every single one of those 5 starts at a D4. Savage Worlds uses, if you remember from the earliest video, that uses a die step system. So it's a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D12 plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, and so on. They all start at D4, which is the lowest, right, die. Most people consider a D6 to be human average. I'm not really convinced that. I think the D4 is really human average. If you look at the fact that the races will begin with a D6 in certain things, that really implies that D4 is the average. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because again, if you roll a D4 and you roll a 4, it explodes when it aces, and then you roll it again. The same thing for all the dice. They roll the highest value. So a D4 has a 25% chance of acing, but has a 75% chance of failing. Just keep that in mind. A lot of people think they're cheating the system by taking all D4 things. You're not. Now you have 5 points to put into these attributes, and it's how you spread it out. And so you could have, really, it's against your concept. You're super smart, you're super wise, you're super spirit, you're super strong, you're super healthy, super agile. It's going to be really tough to min-max. Some people will try it, and when they make their first few characters, and they realize a balance is called for, because as you advance, you can increase your attributes on your own. That's your call. That's attributes in a nutshell. Next up is buying skills. So the game starts with a set of what we call core skills. It was a lesson learned from a lot of earlier editions in Savage Worlds. They realized people weren't taking certain skills that were incredibly useful and are skills that most people have in real life. So those core skills, and these all start at a D4 automatically for every character. They're athletics, which controls climbing, swimming, throwing, grappling, and a few other things. Common knowledge, which is it's just, hey, what's your street knowledge, right? If someone says something and you're like, oh, that's a gang member of X gang, it could be a common knowledge check. Notice, it's you take in the environment and you find traps, things like that. Persuasion, your ability to BS your way through a situation or to convince someone to do something. Persuasion in Savage Worlds can never be used against another player character. It's actually written in the rules. And the last one is stealth. Everyone can be sneaky to a degree, or at least they can try to be sneaky to a degree, and that's where stealth comes into it. Again, those all start at D4, so those are free skills, and go from there. Now you have 12 points to spend on your skills, and if you don't buy a skill, you still can use the skill. You're just going to use it untrained, and that means you're going to roll a D4 minus 2, and then you're going to roll your wild die, which is almost always going to be a D6 minus 2. And your target number is, again, if you remember, almost always a 4. So a -2 is an incredibly potent penalty in Savage Worlds. And a +2 is a very potent bonus in Savage Worlds. So when you realize that untrained, but again, you have a chance of doing these things, and you have bennies. So I've seen people succeed on untrained skill checks to high degrees. Lady luck is with you, or she's not. But you can obviate some of that, and again, there are a lot of things that you can get to in game. People can help you with things. When you buy a skill, it's 1 point to get it at a D4, and then it's 1 point to increase it every step beyond that. However, every skill has linked to an attribute. So athletics is linked to agility. If your agility is a D6, you buy your athletics, it's a D4, a D6. The moment you want to exceed the linked attribute, it costs an extra point to buy the skill beyond those. And so you're paying extra because it's extra effort, because your natural affinity for whatever is covered in the skills based on your attributes is a limiting factor. It's just reality. You can't be a super awesome person if your natural inborn talents just aren't there. But it's real simple. The formula walks you through it in the book. It's just like I said, you're increasing it by an extra point what you need. And then again, you can forego some of the skills, and you will, and there's going to be untrained roles. And not every skill is used in every setting. So like hacking is a skill, but in the base rule book, but obviously hacking may not be applicable to some settings. And it's kind of is what it is. Even languages, I use languages, and language can be a skill because I understand how language works in the real world, and sometimes you panic and get things wrong, so it's nice to know what you can do. So there's a way around that. You can add skills, you can remove skills. It really is up to the GM what the setting is going to be. The last thing I want to cover is going to be your derived statistics. So you have a handful of these. Pace is almost always 6 unless you're small or you have a reduced pace, and 6 is 6 inches, so it's going to be usually 1 square on a thing. The difference is the Savage Worlds counts that is 2 yards. It's very complicated and confusing, to be honest, but it is what it is. So it's not just 5 feet, it's going to be 2 yards to a square. It is what it is, and it's no one really cares. You just think in terms of squares anyway, in terms of inches. That's automatic. You also have a running die, which is almost always a D6. So in Savage World, you can take running as an action. You can run once. You move your pace and you roll your running die because it's going to be a limit. They wanted to keep things random, so you can run the extra room. If you do anything other than that, because Savage Worlds has multi-actions, if you run and then stab someone, you're going to run, and then your fighting roll is going to be at a -2, for instance. So that's how movement works. Parry. So your parry is how well you can defend yourself in melee, or maybe a few other situations. It is a derived statistic. So to get your parry score, it is 2 plus 1/2 your fighting die. So if your fighting die is a D6, that half of that is a 3, plus 2 is 5, if my math checks out. So your parry would be a 5. So if someone's trying to stab you, they don't need a 4, they need a 5 or better to get you. And for every 4 points over your parry, they get a raise. We talked about that. So a raise gives you extra damage. And the last derived statistic is toughness. Toughness is, so you may hit someone, and then you got to roll damage against their toughness. And your toughness is also derived. It is equal to 2 plus half of your vigor die. So if your vigor is a D8, half of that is 4, plus 2 is 6. So if I'm rolling damage, I have to roll a 6 or better in order to start affecting your character with wounds. It's a shaken. If I touch your toughness, if I go 4 points higher than your toughness, so from a 6 to a 10, if I hit a 10, that's a wound, and then another 4 points is another wound and another wound. Now you're not automatically wounded. You can try to soak the rolls. You throw out a Benny and you make a vigor check, and if you get a success and a raise, and you start rolling down those wounds. You don't gotta, your vigor check for soaking doesn't have to equal what the damage roll was. You just simply have to roll the 4, an 8, a 12, a 16, and so on. It's a normal check. And that's how that works, and that's how you stay alive in Savage Worlds. Next, we'll follow up with edges.